Greetings, this is Griff Ruby. Former readers of my columns in Daily Catholic and the Four Marks may have been wondering what I've been doing over the past 4 years during my relative silence on a lot of these things. Well, it's been primarily a time to hit the books, starting with St. Francis de Sales's The Catholic Controversy. Actually, this was one I had read very early in my Catholic formation, which was really inspiring. It's why I take him as my patron saint. It's also holds up very well. I reread it again during this time, and it was a very good start for a lot of what I knew. However, it's also been a time for the 3 volumes of dogmatic theology by Monsignor Van Noort. Obviously, the second volume has been a particular interest, and I have a video series on some of that. But all 3 actually have some interesting things to contribute, and were very interesting and worthwhile reading, I would say. It was also, as a secondary source, I picked up The Church of Christ by Father Sylvester Berry, and The Church of the Word Incarnate by Monsignor Charles Jonet, which I know some people have some questions about, but one can sift through pretty carefully and easily. It's pretty straightforward. He behaves as a good theologian, at least, even when he's venturing some ideas that he admits are radical. And of great service to me has been these translations that I've been hearing of St. Bellarmine's theological works. They've been a real godsend in all of this, and have been a major help. Of course, references also made to the Code of Canon Law, to some various other sources that are quoted in by Xavier de Silveira's writing, and various people that he quotes, even a little from St. Thomas Aquinas. So there's a lot of good sources that have gone into what I now present is my new book, which I now introduce, Sede Vacante. Now, I call it Sede Vacante because that is the situation, that is one aspect of the circumstance of the church that's very conspicuous. However, this is not to go denigrating, traditional Catholics who have not discovered or accepted the Sede Vacante finding. I think some of the reasons they might have had for that are reasonable reasons, even though the conclusion their reasonable reasons seem to lead to have proven out to be incorrect. They've still managed to behave the same, and that's what's important, and that's what makes this important for all traditional Catholics. So, now my book, however, is sort of like a somewhat advanced book in that I'm assuming that the reader is familiar with the difference between between real traditional Catholicism versus what they get at their local Novus Ordo outlet, St. Miscellaneouses and so forth. But I would say there's been any number of great books by Archbishop Lefebvre, for example. There's the Ottaviani Intervention that's pretty well known. Dr. Kumar Swami wrote some books that are kind of interesting and worthwhile. Father Shikata did a marvelous analysis of the Mass, first with this, and then later on he expanded it considerably with this, which I'm still reading now. It's really awesome. And Reform of the Roman Liturgy by Monsignor Klaus Gammer. Peter Lovest Thou Me by Abby LaRuth. Iota Unum by Romano Amerio. Very well-known works. Very dignified, very much get into it. But even such things as The Great Facade, which documents a lot, or even Resist You to the Faith. Kind of light reading, but still brings out the point pretty well. The Robert Church by Patrick Omlar. Lots of good stuff in here. But a pretty good overall summary of the things that are wrong would be what has happened to the Catholic Church. And finally, there's the Ille Lama Sectani, an 11-volume series still in work. This is the early edition of the very first volume, standing in for a whole gigantic series which really delves into all the things that have been going wrong and show the difference between being a Catholic versus being the Novus Ordo, the difference in their prayers, their worship, their belief. So I would assume that most traditional Catholics have read several or more of those books. And if you haven't, I would strongly urge you to pick at least any three of those. There's another one, the Abbe Donantis Books of Accusations, but that's only online, I think. That's all I have of that. Anyway, anyone who's taken any three of those, preferably at least some of the thicker ones, which have a really good understanding of what it is that's gone wrong. But what does that mean? And most importantly, how does that factor into our circumstance today? That's where this comes in. It's time to examine our current ecclesial circumstance through the lens of standard church ecclesiology. Because right now, what gets served up as ecclesiology by traditional Catholics ends up being a little more than a complaint or a gripe or oh my God, the Pope is a heretic. He's not a Pope. Look at all these evidence, and yada yada yada. I mean, there's enough evidence to fill volumes. But that's not ecclesiology. If they're selling you that as ecclesiology, you bought a bill of goods. I'm sorry, But there's real ecclesiology, and real ecclesiology has a great deal to tell us. There are a great many doctrines, and what I do is I step through those doctrines one by one by one. Big ones, little ones, a bunch of them. I put them in what I call 16 doctrinal categories, and then I make some deductions off of that. Now, actually, my book is 2 books. Reason being that, well, for one thing, it's very, very large. In one volume, it would be 850 pages, and that's even bigger than Salsa and Cisco's book, and I don't waste any space on Feeneyism and other such red herrings. This is all about the church, and what we know about the church, and where the church is, and how we can know that through the doctrines of ecclesiology. Now, Volume 1 focuses specifically on the dogmatic aspect. Readers of some of my other columns and articles, or even my Resurrection book, which is still also in print, are probably familiar with what I call my Lumen Gentium theory. But it's a good idea to keep theory separated from doctrine and dogma. So Volume 1 is dedicated specifically and exclusively to the dogmas and doctrines, and does not get into the theory at all, doesn't even mention it, because there's a lot to be gleaned just from what we know, gleaned from the great teachings of all these other sources I've been citing. Now, once that's been presented, Volume 2 gives us a chance to explore some of the mystery of what happened. How did such a thing as Vatican II happen? Especially the context of the promises of God and the doctrines of the Church, and so on and so forth. Part 1 goes a long ways towards addressing these things, sufficient, in fact, for the Church to pick up and continue. So much you could throw away Volume 2 and still have enough to know what to do, what the Church should do. But Volume 2 has enough in here, some real interest, that helps us understand. There's some 23 different scenarios that Catholics have come up with in attempting to explain all these things, plus some combinations, and all of that doesn't even include conspiracy theories and end of the world theories. You see, so that's a lot. And I compare all of those in an appendix to Volume 2 to the standard doctrines of the Church. The doctrines should be the measure, because any theory can usually fit pretty well to one or two or several doctrines. And some of them may fit to a fair number of them, but it takes a really good theory to fit to all of them, and that's what mine really does. So it's like, I can't say that Volume 2 is anything more than something being academically ventured, but it is something with a lot to go for. Anyway, I think traditional Catholics and any other concerned person who really is serious about the faith, and especially seminarians or prospective seminarians, will find this very rewarding to know that if you are becoming a Catholic priest or have the fortune to become a traditional Catholic bishop, you are part of the Church. You are not just some hired hack. You're not just some sacrament vending machine. You are really part of the Church. And as such, you're entitled to respect. You also have responsibilities, which by and large such persons generally accept anyway. So why not just step up to the plate and accept openly what everyone has already been acting as if they already knew. So anyway, there it is. I provide links to where you can find that. You can find these books available through Amazon, and happy reading. Thank you. God bless.